All right, so we are back again today with Claudia Barber, who is running for Judge of the Circuit Court of Anne Arundel County. Claudia, how are you?
I'm doing well, thank you.
Thank you for accepting the interview. I know that you're busy going back and forth between DC and Maryland practicing law, so I think that's the first thing I want to bring out with you is what is your experience going into your candidacy?
My experience is really one in which I have a very diversified background in civil and criminal law. For over 16 years, when I first finished law school, let me go all the way back to when I first finished law school. I completed a clerkship on the Circuit Court for Baltimore City. Before then, Master Elizabeth Topman. And during that time period, I had a bird's eye view of what cases looked like in the circuit court. And the lawyer, I worked with and interacted with attorneys and observed cases at that time. And shortly after that time period, I later became an environmental attorney for PRC, a government contractor out of McLean, Virginia. So from that point, my law practice started to grow, and I remained in private practice for over 16 years. And I did a variety of cases. I represented a lot of churches and their parishioners. I worked on workers' compensation cases, bankruptcy cases, breach of contract cases, landlord-tenant matters, representing creditors' rights, debtors' rights, civil cases, criminal cases. I was a Criminal Justice Act panel attorney. I was working in and out of Anne Arundel County Circuit Court as a child in need of assistance attorney. On those child in need of assistance cases, I represented the parents and through the Public Defender's Office. So I practiced in Anne Arundel County, Charles County, Calvert County, St. Mary's County, Baltimore City. Those were the major jurisdictions that I was assigned. And I practiced before Master Wolf, Judge Eugene Lerner in the Anne Arundel County Circuit Court system. And I also did a lot of work representing corporations, setting up nonprofit corporations, conducting real estate closings, and also litigating cases in both state and federal courts. So that was for over 16 years. Then in 2005, I had the wonderful opportunity to apply for a position on a panel, a central panel of administrative law judges that was forming as a result of new laws that were passed in the District of Columbia. Because I was barred in both Maryland and the District of Columbia, I was fully vetted by the District of Columbia Commission on Selection and Tenure. And during that vetting process, it was a very rigorous process. It involved a panel or commission of members, including a chief administrative law judge, including the judges on the DC Superior Court, and also lawyers that were appointed by the DC Council. Those panel, this was not a partisan commission at all, and there was very little room, if any, for politics to take participate or be a part of the vetting process. So that's very different than the Maryland vetting process. They pull your credit report. You have to demonstrate your credit worthiness as part of the vetting process to become an administrative law judge. And I passed with flying colors. I distinctly remember one of the panelists, the judges on the panel, Judge Robert Rigsby, asked me, when was the last time you did a jury trial? And at that time, I immediately told him I just finished a jury trial with Judge Mary Terrell in D.C. Superior Court. So I had ample jury trial experience. And that wasn't the only jury trial I did. I did jury trials in Prince George's County Circuit Court before Judge Sutherland and many other judges. So my career as an administrative law judge, however, spanned from 2005 to 2016. I've authored over 5,000 decisions, and the distinction from my candidacy from other candidates is that I have a track record, a solid track record of over 10 years of experience as an administrative law judge in the District of Columbia, adjudicating cases, hearing testimony, weighing credibility, writing final decisions. And many of those decisions, if they were appealed to the D.C. Court of Appeals, which is the highest appellate court, that particular court, in many instances, affirmed my decisions. It wasn't 100%, but many times my cases were affirmed by the D.C. Court of Appeals. And on my website, I have an example of published opinions in which the D.C. Court of Appeals made the highly unusual decision to publish my the affirmance decision of affirming or upholding my cases on appeal. And two of them that were published within the last, let's say, 5 or 10 years was Desmond Bartholomew versus the Office of Tax and Revenue, and another one was NBC subsidiary WRC-TV versus the Office of Tax and Revenue. That type of solid work experience, in addition to being a judge, an actual judge, qualifies me to take on this task of becoming a circuit court judge.
So I wanted to, that was a great answer. That was a long answer, but it was a great answer, my goodness. I wanted to ask you, you mentioned about how the selection process for the panel in DC that you were eventually selected for.
Yes.
You talked about politics not being a part of that, and that's so important in courts, to keep politics out of courts. Why is it so important?
It's important because in my opinion, our judicial system is not perfect. It is a very imperfect system in many ways. And you can't have a situation where a judge hears a case that involves the state of Maryland or the governor, and then that same case may involve a decision. How do you think the other side feels in terms of how they believe the outcome of the case will be if the individual believes that the governor that appointed this judge to the bench is now hearing a case involving that governor? So
so politics has to be completely out of it.
Politics should be out of it, and unfortunately, it's not.
Is it out of it? Okay, let's talk about Anne Arundel County and the office that you're seeking. Is politics out of that office?
No, absolutely not. You know, the selection process, and this again is for circuit court judges only. The selection process involves a judicial nominating commission. And how is that judicial nominating commission formed? It is a group of Anne Arundel County Bar Association members and a group of governor-appointed members. So the governor picks who he wants on that panel or that commission.
Gotcha.
To shortlist the candidates that should go forward and should be interviewed and chosen ultimately for the job. So it's a very political process.
I'm aware that happened to you, correct?
Well, I did apply for the commission, through the commission process many years ago, and over a course of a decade, a solid decade, that's when the system began to demonstrate, numerically wise and on its face, that the system was practicing exclusion. There were no people of color that were being
politics.
Yeah, it was just politics as usual, shortlisting people based on who they know that are associated with the Bar Association and the governor, and that whole system is imperfect. in many ways, and it was essentially excluding, factually, it was excluding people of color for one entire decade. There were never any African Americans, Hispanic Americans, Asian Americans shortlisted at all for a solid decade. So then when you come to the polls and you're looking at sitting judges, all of the sitting judges look the same. And that is a problem, and that's one of the imperfections of the judicial system.
That you're trying to fix, and that was what I was going to ask you, people of color. You're going to be the first woman of color, correct?
Yes,
Judge,
forever. Now that statistic is
it's embarrassing. It's embarrassing. It's
suggest,
disgusting. I just don't understand why. We're in the 21st century,
and that happens.
It doesn't matter the color of your skin. It doesn't matter if you're gay, straight. It doesn't matter who you worship. If you offer something good,
you should be considered. And because and see the good thing about Maryland as a state, and I have to partially credit the legislature, and even the late Governor Marvin Mandel, when he formed the Judicial Nominating Commission process, he knew that it would be an imperfect process. So he knew that going through that process may have its imperfections. And because of that, he left as an alternative an opportunity for people who believe they were shut out of the system to still apply, file a certificate of candidacy, and go for the position on an open process. If you're a registered voter, if you're over the age of 35, if you are reside in the county, and you are you've been practicing law for more than 5 years, then yes, you can file and run in a contested election for the trial court positions. And the trial court of general jurisdiction is a very, very important spot, because the circuit courts are the courts that not only entertain felonies and misdemeanors and jury trials, but it also handles family law. It handles petitions for name change. It handles
I was just going to ask you what the circuit court does. It's so important, because
Yes.
that's one of my favorite questions to ask candidates, especially on certain positions that a lot of people don't know what they do, like the circuit court judge.
Right.
I like to ask that, because you hear so many different things, and it's like, well, I know what the correct answer is because I'm reading about it and studying about it before I do interviews. But it's funny to see so many people describe it. So continue your description of what the circuit court does in Anne Arundel County.
Well, it's the court that hears and tries cases of a multitude of areas. So they have workers' compensation appeals. They may have a lot of administrative law appeals. They have appeals from the district court, and not the federal district court, but the small claims landlord-tenant district court. They would hear those appeals. They would hear cases involving petitions for name change, failure to pay child support, distribution of marital assets cases. They would hear cases involving corporations, dissolution of partnerships, dissolution of corporations, shareholder derivative suits. Those are all state court cases that involving, let's say, civil matters. So auto accident cases, personal injury auto accident cases, medical malpractice cases that are appealed from the Health Claims Arbitration Board. All of those cases could...
You hear all of those.
All of those cases fall under circuit court jurisdiction.
Gotcha.
So you also hear cases or petitions for review from administrative agencies, declaratory judgment actions. They are all circuit court actions, and of course your average breach of contract claims that may involve large dollar amounts.
Yeah.
And they also, some people may or may not be aware of this, but circuit courts also can hear Title VII EEO cases that initially were thought to only be tried in federal court. And there was a U.S. Supreme Court decision, Yellow Freight Systems versus Donnelly, that allows a litigant to take a notice of right to sue that was issued from the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. They don't have to go to federal court to file their lawsuit. They can file their case in the circuit court of the county where they reside or where the employer is.
Gotcha.
And so that is another expansion. The Supreme Court made it clear that Title VII cases do not have to be litigated in federal court. They can go to state courts, and it would be the circuit court in that particular instance.
One last question is interesting because, like I said, I'd love to hear what all the other candidates say, so I'm excited to hear what you have to say. What do you see wrong with the Anne Arundel County Circuit Court right now? And what is your biggest thing when you go in there, like in your first 100 days of your administration? What's going to happen?
Well, the first 100 days, one thing about the judicial system, number one, all judges go through Judicial Institute. That is their fundamental training ground that they have, and it allows them to become better equipped and trained on what may come before them, multiple defendant cases, multiple motions in a complex case, especially in complex cases, handling evidentiary rulings and things of that nature. And because I've had a background in adjudicating cases, hopefully that experience, that experience should not be foreign to me or unusual. But realistically, there is no individual, I don't care what kind of lawyer they are, they don't know all the law. Normally, trained lawyers, when they become judges, they have experiences that they bring to the bench. For example, you could have a prosecutorial background, but you may not have a background in workers' compensation. You may not have a background in civil law. You may not have any background in nonprofit law. You may not have any background in bankruptcy law. You may not have any background in creditors and debtors' rights because you've been prosecuting.
I had no idea that there was all those different types of
Yeah,
laws, so
yeah,
that just tells you.
Yeah, you may not have any background in environmental law.
Gotcha.
So the Judicial Institute is there for all judges to establish their training ground, and that's part of the first 100 days process. But in addition to that, my goal as a circuit court judge would also, again, be to adjudicate cases in the most fairest way. And I think the entire community benefits when you have a fair-minded jurist, because a fair-minded jurist is not going to be biased based on someone's skin color or perceived implicit bias. They're not going to have generally implicit biases because for the most part, we're here to serve all. So
You're not serving one part of the community,
we're
you're
not
serving everybody.
you're serving everybody. So you are least likely to see lopsided sentences. Because oftentimes you hear of lopsided sentences all over the nation where, for example, Anthony Ray Hinton was featured on a program, CBS Morning, with Oprah and Gail. And he was an individual that was wrongly incarcerated, and he spent 30 years in prison for a crime he did not commit. And it was just a sham of a trial. And the officer had the audacity to tell him that because he was black, because the judge was white, because the jury is going to be all white, and because the police officer that's going to testify against you is going to be white, you're going to lose. And he didn't care if he committed the crime or didn't commit the crime. And I think that process is just so heinous that somebody could conceivably lock someone up for 30 years knowing that they didn't care that they got it right. And I have a conscience, and I want to get it right. And that's the type of motivation you should have in your next circuit court judge. They want to get it right. They are on a mission to get it right, and they don't want, they want to incarcerate violent offenders, of course. Keep them off the streets because public safety is important. But at the same time, you do not want a situation or an outcome of wrongful incarceration. That is a complete injustice, and it basically shows that certain people's lives don't matter, and that's unconscionable from my perspective, completely unconscionable.
One last question: if you win, can I wear your robes, please? I've always wanted to do that. Please,
Well,
can I come in and have a kids' day where we just go in and I do
and hit the gavel and all that,
right.
With my permission, yes.
You're awesome. Thank you, Claudia Barber, so much for the interview. You're welcome back on my program anytime that you want.
Thank you.
Again, her name is Claudia Barber. She's running for Anne Arundel County Circuit Court Judge here in the county. Primary elections are on June 26th. It's next Tuesday. No, the Tuesday after.
Right, but we have early voting.
Early voting starting this Thursday.
This Thursday, June 14th to
yeah.
June 21. You can register at the polls. There are 7 polling places in Maryland, or in the county rather, for your early voting opportunities from 10 a.m. until 8 p.m. And then the poll on primary day will be open 7 a.m. until 8 p.m.
Thank you so much, Claudia.
Thank
again.
you.
We appreciate it.
Thank you so much for your time.
Joseph Olmo, the Arundel Patriot.